Hi everybody, it's Tammy, back at you today with another recipe. Going to be meeting a friend today to go walking in the conservation area. We're going to take a nice hike on the trails. So I think I'm going to bring my friend some muffins, homemade muffins. Love homemade baking. I think I like baking a touch more than cooking, although I love both. Anyways, we're going to get right into this recipe. I am going to share with you my favorite banana muffin recipe. This is my go-to recipe when I've got bananas that are overripe and need to be used up. Don't throw out bananas. I always peel them if they get overripe and I don't need to make muffins. I just throw them in the freezer for later. First thing we're going to do though is I've measured out 1/3 cup of skim milk. And I got right down to measure that at eye level, so I got the right amount of milk. And I'm just going to add to that 1/2 teaspoon of vinegar. And I'm just going to let that sit aside because I'm just souring my milk so that it reacts properly with my leavening agent, which is baking soda in this recipe. So put that aside. So I do that first so that by the time I measure everything else out and get everything ready to go, that milk is ready to be used in the recipe. So do that, that's step one. Next thing to do is get your oven preheating, which mine is already preheating because I want to be a little bit prepared for these videos, right? Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a big mixing bowl and I'm going to put in my dry ingredients into the mixing bowl. So I started, this recipe calls for 1 2/3 cup of whole wheat flour. So there is no white flour in this recipe, so it's very healthy and it's very tasty. So I already put the 2/3 cup in, but I wanted to save the 1 cup because I put the 1 cup in. I'm going to show you how to measure flour properly with the 2/3 cup. So I have my 1/3 cup measure. I need 2/3, so I need 2 of these. And I'm just going to show you how to properly measure flour because this is a little baking secret. Is that when you are measuring flour, I keep my flour, usually I transfer it into a very wide mouth container. And what I do is when I take the lid off my flour, I fluff it up a little bit because it gets all packed into the container. And you want to make sure you lighten it up, otherwise you're going to measure out too much flour. So then what I do is I take my measure and I just spoon the flour in there, and I'm going to make sort of like a little mountain, and I'm not going to pat it or compact it down. I'm just going to leave it nice and fluffy, and then I'm just going to take any kind of straight edge. I have an offset spatula here, and I'm just going to measure that or just scrape it level. So I'm going to do that one more time. So you just want to take your nice light fluffy flour, just scoop it in here, make a little mountain, and then just level it off. And that's the proper way to measure flour so that you're not measuring too much flour into the recipe. So I'm just going to cover that up and get it out of here so that I don't re-measure that. Then this recipe also calls for 1 teaspoon of baking soda. You can see I've got my baking soda in a bag because once I've opened the container, if I don't keep it in plastic, like close a bag around it, this baking soda is going to absorb any moisture that's in my kitchen. So if you've ever boiled a pot of pasta or anything like that, you've got moisture in your kitchen. This ends up clumping and reacting with all that moisture in your kitchen. So once it's open, I like to put it in a bag. So I'm going to get 1 teaspoon. And another little trick I'm going to show you, I do this with baking soda and baking powder, is I like to just keep an edge, right? And I just run my spoon along to get a nice even 1 teaspoon. But I always use a little sieve to run my baking soda through because you can see there are just a few little chunkies left in the bottom there. And I don't want to get that in my mouth or in my muffin when I'm biting into it. Baking soda, even baking powder, is quite bitter. So if you've ever had a muffin and someone hasn't done that, sometimes once in a while you get a little surprise and it's not so pleasant. So that I'm just going to close up and I put that away. Also to this, I am going to, for my recipe, I'm going to add a little bit of chia seeds just because I like that little bit of crunch in the baking, in my banana muffins. So about a tablespoon, in that goes. And a little bit of salt. So I don't need a lot of salt in this recipe. There's a lot of flavors that are going to come from the bananas, the ripe bananas. So I am going to use, what is this? This looks like 1/8 of a teaspoon. I'm going to use 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. Just to say that there is some salt in it, because salt does actually give taste for sure. The other thing I'm going to use to bump up the taste is I'm going to use a little bit of ground cardamom. I love cardamom. It's got sort of a little hint of orange taste to it. It's a wonderful spice. I sometimes buy the cardamom seeds and grind them myself because I have a coffee grinder, and I use it just for grinding fresh seeds to make really fresh spices. So ½ a teaspoon of cardamom, and that also is going to add some wonderful, wonderful flavors. And they pair really nice with bananas. If you don't like cardamom, or you don't have any cardamom, then you can always use cinnamon, allspice. Some people are nutmeg people. I am not a nutmeg person, but if you like nutmeg, you can make it nutmeg. Make it your own. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to take those dry ingredients. I'm actually going to mix them. So that's another little secret. Sometimes people just throw together the dry ingredients and then they start to mix their wet ingredients in, and this isn't well combined. And so sometimes it's just not well distributed. Everything is sort of in clumps, and it's not going to make for nice muffins. So be sure to mix that dry ingredients together to get, your spices and all your little seeds if you're putting them in. And the seeds, by the way, you don't have to put the chia seeds in. That's just something that I've added over the years because, I want to add a little bit of crunch and a little bit of a texture to that. So I'm just going to put that aside. What I'm going to do too, though, is I'm going to make a little well in the middle of those dry ingredients, just because when I pour the wet ingredients in, I want them to get right to the bottom of this batter, because if I don't do that, then I'm going to have to over mix it. And when it comes to quick breads, that's another thing you don't want to do, is mix them too much. So I've already mashed my bananas. Now, I'm cheating a little bit in this recipe. I didn't have 3 ripe bananas for this recipe, which is fine. I had 2 very ripe bananas that I mashed up with a fork. And so because I didn't have enough bananas, I happen to have always on hand some unsweetened applesauce. So I put about ½ a cup of unsweetened applesauce in here to bump up the fruit. And you know what, that's okay. These aren't going to taste like apple muffins. Unsweetened applesauce has a very mild flavor, and those 2 bananas have a ton of flavor because they were well ripened. And realize that those bananas, or this fruit in general, is going to give moisture to the mixture. The bananas are going to give that taste as well, but you're not getting a lot of nutrition in the bananas, right? Because obviously rotting fruit, or well ripened, we'll say, we won't say rotting, well ripened bananas don't have a lot of nutrition. So that's kind of a little tidbit, is that as soon as fruit or vegetables are picked, the nutritional value starts to go down in them. That's why sometimes frozen vegetables and fruit are exceptionally high in nutrients, because they typically are picked and then flash frozen very, very quickly after they're picked. So they're retaining their nutrition. Whereas some vegetables and fruits that travel from very far distances and are handled multiple times, that is where you lose some nutrition along the way. So there's the plug for buying things locally as much as possible so that your food isn't traveling great distances. Okay, so there are my bananas. I'm going to add an egg to that, so 1 egg. And typically I will add this egg into a measuring cup, not straight in, but these eggs are very fresh. My shell didn't break. I'm very good at cracking eggs. And I'm adding that in. Typically though, I'll put it in a separate little container, especially if I'm doing multiple eggs, not just one, just to make sure no eggshells appear in my muffins. To that, I'm also going to put in 3 tablespoons of oil. That's all this recipe calls for, is 3 tablespoons, which is about 1/4 cup. About. So I'm just going to go 1. And some of this stuff I don't pre-measure. I know in a lot of cooking videos, people pre-measure a lot of things and throw them in. I mean, I did pre-measure my vinegar for you. But you know what? In real life, are you going to pre-measure everything like that? Not likely, because you'd have a million dishes. Thanks, but no thanks. Anyways, so there's my 3 tablespoons. And of course, I need a little bit of sugar. So in the original recipe, it called for 2/3 cup of sugar. You do not need that much sugar. The bananas and even the applesauce, if it was just the bananas, that gives you some sugar. And I'm also going to add some other sugar to this recipe, but in another form. So I cut that sugar right in half, and I am only going to use 1/3 instead of 2/3 cup. So 1/3 cup of brown sugar. And I don't pack mine really, I know how, like a lot of recipes say pack brown sugar, so you're packing it in there. I just loosely put it in there and add it to my recipe. Just make sure that you really close up your brown sugar well after, so that it doesn't get all hard. Then I'm just going to mix all these wet ingredients together really quickly. The other thing I'm going to add to this actually is a teaspoon of vanilla as well. This is optional. I do like pure vanilla extract. I certainly spend a little bit more and get the pure instead of the artificial. I just find the flavor is a lot truer. It doesn't have sort of a bitter aftertaste. So I am going to add a teaspoon of the vanilla as well, and that's going to give it some wonderful flavor. So these muffins don't need a lot of salt because they have many layers of amazing flavor. I'm going to add in my milk that's been souring on the side. So what you can see I'm doing is I'm separating my dry and my wet ingredients. And that's how most baking recipes go. Not all of them, but a good majority of them, especially when it comes to quick breads. So things like muffins, pancakes, tea biscuits, soda breads, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so I've got my well made in the middle of my dry ingredients. It's kind of caving in there, so I'm just going to give it a little, get my well going again. So the one thing you don't want to do with a quick bread, like a muffin, you don't want to over mix it, okay? You want to definitely just mix it only to bring the batter together. So let me just get all that goodness out of the bowl with my handy dandy spatula. One of my favorite kitchen tools, as I've said a million times in my videos. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start going around that bowl, getting that flour into the wet ingredients. And I'm not going to overmix. Like, I'm not beating this like a cake batter. I'm just kind of folding it. I'm scraping the flour from the sides of the bowl as I'm running the spoon through this batter. And it, you know what? It's just going to come together. Just running that spoon back and forth, dragging it along the sides and the bottom, not beating this, just mixing and kind of folding, almost folding that batter and incorporating. So just before it all incorporates, there's still some flour showing. I'm going to add in now to this a cup of frozen blueberries. So I kept those in the freezer because I don't want them thawed. I don't want these blueberries to turn my batter completely blue. So I kept them in the freezer because I wanted them frozen. I didn't want them to, as they say, bleed out into the recipe and then, you know, color it. So I'm just going to gently, as I'm getting the last of that flour incorporated, gently mix these through, but I want them to get through because I certainly don't want blueberries in just half my muffins. I want it in the batter, but just gently folding that over and incorporating those blueberries. Now, something else that I had done ahead of time, and I should have showed you, I already had my muffin pan ready as well. All this stuff needs to be ready ahead of time with baking, because the one thing with the leavening agent, so the baking soda in this case, is it's already starting to react. So I don't really want to waste too much time. Like, you can't walk away and like get the clothes out of the dryer, or go feed the dog or whatever you have to do. You got to get the batter into the pan, into this and get it into the oven, and that's why the oven has to be preheated and ready to go too. So those are all these little tips I'm giving you. These are the secrets to successful baking, because I often hear people tell me, I can't bake. And I say to them, yes, you can. You just need to know a few little things, and you are going to be a baking pro. So just going to quickly get these in, and then I'm going to get them into the oven, and then I will just show you. I've got something already prepared that will show you after. Flip this pan around and get to this side. So don't feel like you have to carry the batter across the pan. Be sure to flip the pan around and get the other 6 on the other side. So this is going to make 12 muffins. Okay. I know people they sometimes won't move pans, and they end up dragging batter from one end to the next, and yeah, it doesn't end up inside the individual muffin containers. Okay. And of course, get my handy dandy spatula, because there is a lot of batter still left in this pan, and I just want to make sure I don't waste it and I use it up. Okay. And try to get them full, about the same amount of batter in each one, so that you don't get massive muffins in 3 of your for 3 muffins, and then the rest of them are like these teeny little things, and like they're not going to cook evenly. So try to get about the same amount of batter. Sometimes people use an ice cream scoop, the half-cup ice cream scoop, because it's kind of like a pre-measurement, and they just do it that way, and they find that's the easy way for them to measure out about the same amount. So my oven is ready to go. I'm going to throw these in. They're going to take about 20 minutes to cook. So if you have a timer, use it. If it's on your stove, that's fine. If it's not, just get yourself a little timer, or tell Siri to time 20 minutes. Actually, I got Siri sitting right in front of me. So yeah, you can do that as well, but time it so you don't forget about it. And then what you're going to do is, after the 20 minutes, you're going to check them, because again, like I mentioned before, ovens run slightly different temperatures. A lot of people don't ever check their oven temperatures to see if they're accurate. So you always want to check with baking. So I like to use a cake tester. So it's just a little wire tester, and I just stick it in and test. But if you have just, a toothpick or something, that's okay as well. Just that this way I don't have to waste toothpicks. I just always have something that I can just clean up really quickly afterwards. So that's going to take about 20 minutes. I am not going to make you wait for that, but my friend is going to get to have some awesome muffins. Anyways, in the meantime, I did make a batch this morning. And so this batch, I ended up making mini muffins. So this recipe is very flexible. The original recipe was actually a loaf. I find loaves take a long time to cook, so I prefer muffins, and I like little individual portions. So you can make mini muffins. You just have to watch the temperature and watch the time. You can make regular size muffins, or you can make a loaf with this recipe. So be sure to check out the comments, because I will have the recipe in the comments, and I'll have it for muffins or for the loaf. Just one little tip though. My regular muffins were in a light silver muffin tin. This is a dark tin. And whenever you use dark bakeware, sometimes you have to turn the temperature down in the oven a little bit. So this temperature was at 350, and so I turned it down to 325 to bake them in here. Otherwise, when you're baking in dark bakeware, it sometimes will brown whatever you're cooking very quickly and sometimes burn it. So you just have to be careful when you're using dark bakeware. Otherwise, let me have a taste. Now these ones I used actually chia and chocolate chips. Still use the cardamom because that cardamom actually goes wonderful with chocolate and with dried cranberries, raisins. I've used raisins, cranberries, everything. This banana muffin recipe is #1. Anyways, here it is. It's a gorgeous recipe. I used mini chips in my mini muffins just because big chips just don't, spread out nicely in the batter. So I only used, I think, about 1/3 of a cup of chips, and it looks like they're very chocolatey because they just disperse nicely. So let's have a taste. Oh, only 2 bananas in here. Very yummy. Very moist. Oh, this is my favorite recipe. Try it out. Read the comments. Get the recipe. And then get out and have a walk. We'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.